Of course, there's still a gap between the positions of Japan and the United States. Minister Akazawa stated at the Japan-US talks that the US tariff measures are extremely unacceptable, and after explaining Japan's views on the impact on Japanese industry and the expansion of investment and employment in both Japan and the United States,
Ryosei Agasawa told US representatives that tariffs were extremely regrettable. Mr. Agasawa says he believes Washington is looking to secure a deal within the 90-day window, and that Mr. Trump's unexpected presence during discussions shows willingness to cede ground.
What the US is saying is already an impossible task, the theory is already a mess, and there is no consistency whatsoever. However, if Japan were to negotiate about what they have been saying, well, to put it bluntly, it would be akin to a delinquent kid extorting someone.
President Trump's recent remarks about Japan have shattered decades of carefully maintained alliance, revealing a deep-seated frustration that's been simmering beneath the surface. "We sold no cars, like zero cars in Japan," he declared at a speaking event in Michigan.
This morning with the Prime Minister of Japan, and we had a very good conversation. They're coming. And I said, one thing, you're going to have to open up your country because we sold no cars, like zero cars in Japan. And they sold millions of cars into our country.
His voice rising with indignation as he painted a picture of American manufacturing held hostage by foreign interests. The accusation lands like a grenade in diplomatic circles. Japan, one of America's strongest allies in Asia, suddenly cast as an economic predator. But this isn't just another off-the-cuff remark. It's the opening salvo in what's rapidly becoming the most consequential trade conflict of 2025. What makes this moment so explosive isn't just the rhetoric, it's the timing. Just as Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba was preparing for a state visit to Washington, the Trump administration dropped its bombshell: a 25% tariff on Japanese-built vehicles assembled in Mexico and Canada, effective April 3, 2025. The move blindsided Tokyo, directly contradicting assurances made in the 2019 bilateral trade agreement, where Trump himself had promised protection from exactly this kind of action.
And as I touched upon the example of Toyota, they also have another plan to expand their factories as well as start to operate new factories in the near future.
And such a great country. We do want to work on a deficit. We have about $100 billion deficit with Japan, which I'm not surprised because you're very good negotiators, I will say. But we want to work on that and get that down to even equality, I call it. Let's be equal. So I think we'll be able to do that pretty easily.
Is this the beginning of a new era of economic conflict? How can a trade dispute reshape decades of partnership that's weathered Cold War tensions and regional security threats? The stakes couldn't be higher. 746 Japanese companies operate in Mexico alone, with 487 directly tied to automotive production. That's not just statistics, it's thousands of workers, complex supply chains, and billions in investment suddenly thrown into chaos. The impact was immediate and severe. Toyota and Honda, Japanese giants with massive North American operations, watched their stock prices plummet as investors processed the implications. These weren't just foreign companies being targeted, they were deeply integrated parts of the American economic landscape, employing thousands of American workers and supporting countless communities across the heartland. We have invested heavily in North American assembly for efficiency, not to circumvent laws, an unnamed Japanese automaker executive told CNBC in a hastily arranged interview. The frustration in his voice was palpable. Decades of good faith investment in American communities suddenly reframed as some kind of economic subterfuge. But behind closed doors, the reaction was far more calculated. While public statements remained measured, Japanese boardrooms were already wargaming scenarios that would have been unthinkable just months ago. Could they afford to maintain their North American presence? Would shifting production elsewhere trigger even more aggressive measures? The certainty that had defined Japanese-American economic relations for generations was evaporating by the hour. Adding to the tension, the Department of Commerce has been quietly instructed to identify additional auto parts for future tariffs within 90 days, a bureaucratic mechanism that could dramatically expand the conflict. It's a ticking time bomb set for early summer, with parts tariffs temporarily delayed until May 3rd, creating a false calm before what many analysts predict will be a second, more devastating wave of economic impact. Did Washington underestimate Japan's strategic positioning? Could these tariffs unleash a global trade standoff that reshapes the entire automotive industry? The answers were coming faster than anyone anticipated. Within days of the announcement, Japanese automakers began executing contingency plans that had clearly been prepared long in advance. A sobering reminder that in global trade, no one is caught completely by surprise. The objective wasn't to extinguish the fire, but to prevent it from reaching the engine, an anonymous Japanese executive explained, describing their response strategy. It was a telling metaphor. Japan wasn't trying to win a trade war. They were executing a controlled retreat to more favorable terrain. Toyota wasted no time, fast-tracking a new hybrid engine line originally slated for 2026. But the engines wouldn't be heading to North America. Instead, they were destined for expanded production facilities in Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia, a strategic pivot that would reduce reliance on North American plants while simultaneously strengthening Japan's position in emerging Asian markets. Honda followed suit, announcing an accelerated expansion of its Thailand operations that had clearly been in the planning stages for months. What would have been a 3-year transition compressed into a matter of weeks, a demonstration of industrial agility that sent shivers through American manufacturing circles. These weren't panicked reactions, they were the execution of carefully considered contingency plans. Japanese automakers had been preparing for this scenario since the trade tensions of 2019, quietly building redundancies into their global production networks that could be activated at a moment's notice. But the most concerning developments were happening far from the factory floor. Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry convened emergency meetings with the country's financial institutions, exploring options that went well beyond automotive production. Discussions about reducing U.S. Treasury bond purchases, long considered the nuclear option in trade disputes, were suddenly on the table. Simultaneously, Japanese trade representatives accelerated partnership talks with the European Union, creating the foundation for a potential transatlantic trade realignment that would leave American manufacturers isolated on both fronts.
Our economic competitors, like the European Union, are moving faster than ever to strike new deals. This is a third of the global market. It's the largest pact that's been negotiated since the original Trans-Pacific Partnership when the U.S. was part of it.
Could this signal a broader shift away from U.S. dollar supremacy? How effectively can Japan protect its interests on the world stage when pushed into a corner? The answers remain uncertain, but one thing is clear. What began as a targeted policy aimed at protecting American manufacturing has triggered a far more complex and potentially damaging chain reaction than anyone in Washington seems to have anticipated. The consequences are already rippling through American communities. Dealerships across the country report growing shortages of popular Japanese models, with waiting lists extending from weeks to months. Prices have surged in response, with some dealers reporting markups of 15 to 20% on remaining inventory, a cost ultimately borne by American consumers. It undermined years of cross-border innovation and investment, Honda stated in a terse press release that barely concealed the company's frustration. The statement highlighted an uncomfortable truth. Japanese brands collectively hold over 35% of the U.S. passenger vehicle market, a share built on decades of reliability, fuel efficiency, and consumer trust. American manufacturers, meanwhile, find themselves in an unexpected predicament, having largely abandoned compact and hybrid segments in favor of more profitable SUVs and trucks. They lack the product lineup to quickly fill the gap left by retreating Japanese competitors. Ford and GM executives have promised accelerated development of smaller vehicles, but industry analysts estimate it would take 18 to 24 months to bring new models to market, an eternity in today's rapidly shifting landscape. The irony is impossible to ignore. A policy meant to protect American jobs is immediately threatening American employment in dealerships, parts suppliers, and logistics firms. In Ohio alone, where Japanese manufacturers support over 25,000 direct jobs and countless more in the supply chain, economic anxiety is palpable. Rising fuel prices have only compounded the problem, putting larger American vehicles at a disadvantage precisely when more fuel-efficient Japanese alternatives are becoming scarcer. It's a perfect storm that leaves American consumers with fewer choices, higher prices, and growing frustration. Will America's pursuit of manufacturing dominance eventually harm its own consumers? Can domestic automakers catch up in technology and consumer trust before permanent damage is done to their market position? The most profound impact may be one that few anticipated. As Japanese manufacturers accelerate their pivot to electric vehicles in Southeast Asian markets, they're creating innovation ecosystems that increasingly exclude American partners. The technological frontier of automotive development, autonomous systems, advanced battery technology, and artificial intelligence integration is shifting away from Detroit and Silicon Valley toward Tokyo, Bangkok, and Singapore. What began as a trade dispute is rapidly evolving into something far more consequential. A fundamental reorganization of global automotive production that could leave the United States playing catch-up for decades to come. The question isn't whether American manufacturing can be protected by tariffs. It's whether American innovation can survive being cut off from the global networks that increasingly drive technological progress. The clock is ticking toward May 3rd, when auto parts tariffs will deliver the next shock to this already fragile system. What happens next will depend on whether cooler heads can prevail in Washington and Tokyo before positions harden beyond the point of reconciliation.